Hello and welcome everyone to this Atlantic Council event, the final capstone event in our flagship Europe Center Central Europe Week series. My name is Johan Fleck and I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council. And as I mentioned, today we are closing out a fantastic week of programming of our Central Europe Week, an annual event series of public and private convenings and discussions aimed at raising the level of ambition and highlighting the dynamism of the partnership between the United States and the countries of Central Europe, and really working together, convening experts and policymakers to shape an agenda for that US Central Europe partnership. Over the course of this week, we've had 12 different events across Washington, D.C., Prague, Vilnius, and Warsaw, looking at the entire spectrum of the US Central European relationship at a critical time of transition and at a critical time in geopolitics. Today, in our final panel, we will look at the future of transatlantic digital policy and what role Central Europe plays in shaping those policies and that agenda. This is an issue of immense importance to both the United States and Europe. The US-EU digital relationship is a key source of prosperity for both sides of the Atlantic. US tech companies earn more in Europe than anywhere else in the world. And it's also an issue where we've seen lots of movement over the last few years, the last decade really. The European Union has been particularly active, passing a whole raft of initiatives and legislation on digital competition, content moderation, cybersecurity rules, cloud rules, and more. We've also seen a strong element of transatlantic cooperation in this digital and tech space. We've seen shifting sands of data flows capturing the attention of policymakers in Brussels, in Washington, and across the US and Europe. And most people will be familiar with the US-EU Trade and Technology Council, the TTC. That's been a cornerstone of transatlantic engagement under the Biden administration and under Ursula von der Leyen's first term as president of the European Commission, covering issues like artificial intelligence, tech supply chains, and next generation technologies like quantum computing. But needless to say, we're likely to see some changes with the next chapter of US-EU relations, and the digital sphere is not exempt from those changes. And today we'll explore a little bit what we might likely see. Those in the tech space on both sides of the Atlantic are watching closely for what the future of transatlantic cooperation or maybe divergence will be in the coming years as we see a new US administration coming into office early next year, and a new European Commission having already started at the beginning of this month in Brussels. And one key question is also for us in the context of Central Europe Week, what role our Central European allies can play here as they take a more active leadership role inside Europe and as they embrace digital policy as an issue and an agenda they can shape. So to discuss these issues today, we have a great group of experts with us. Joining me today are Fran Burwell, our distinguished fellow with the Council's Europe Center. We have with us Mark Boris Andrijanic, our non-resident senior fellow with the Europe Center and a former Minister of Digital Transformation of Slovenia, who worked closely on the EU's digital files when Slovenia held the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union a few years back. And finally, last but not least, Rita Balak, the Europe lead on the International Government Affairs team at Google, obviously a major player in both the United States and in Europe. Before I get started, just reminding our audience, our viewers, we want to hear from you. Please submit your questions at askac.org. That's askac.org. And now, Fran, let's start with you. As I mentioned, we have a new European Commission in place. We will have a new US administration coming into office in January. It's still early days as we see some key personnel decisions or nominations coming in also in areas and in posts impacting digital and tech policy. What are you watching in terms of key issues, key dynamics, maybe key personnel decisions in the United States as they relate to digital and tech policy? And how do you see this transatlantic, the outlook for a transatlantic tech and digital agenda moving forward?
So thanks, Joran, and thanks to everyone for coming to Central Europe Week. I think that although it is early days, I think we do face a significant shift in the prospects for US-EU cooperation on the tech agenda. We saw in the last administration and commission a gradual convergence. And I think that was particularly true on AI, but also to some extent on social media in terms of the concerns and also the objectives of around certain platforms and disinformation and issues of that sort. But we are now seeing a new US administration that, although it is, as you say, very early days, and we don't yet have a lot of formal appointments in the tech area, but we do have Elon Musk, and we do have a number of other tech leaders who are close to this administration, at least for the moment. And we can see some of their influence already. I would, though, just for a moment, cross the Atlantic and say that in Europe, I think what we have is more of an evolution rather than a change in tech policy. The focus will be on implementation of the quite considerable legislation that the Commission passed, that the EU passed in the last Commission. We do have the competitiveness debate, which has become a watchword for the new Commission. And some of the tech legislation that we're anticipating is really aimed at providing more access for SMEs, for example, to supercomputers and things like that, meant to boost innovation. And I think, we're also looking at an evolution of what was known as digital sovereignty, and we can go into that more, into a broader concept of tech sovereignty. But I think the real change is coming on the US side, where we have the Trump administration, at least as we are seeing now, has kind of a mixed signaling on tech issues. So clearly there are some, such as Musk and others, who are very much anti-regulation and have pointed to some of the rules that the Biden administration put into effect, for example, the executive order on AI, and we now expect that to be rescinded. At the same time, while some are advocating for a much an unfettered approach to the tech industry, others are looking at particularly some of the social media platforms and accusing them of censorship and equating content moderation with censorship, particularly of conservative views. And I think that this is something that is very distinctly different from the European approach. And in fact, we can go into this later, but the views in Europe and the United States of what is free speech and what is legal speech are different. And I think this is going to put some of the tech companies in the crosshairs of being pushed in one direction in a major market and pushed in another direction in another major market. So it's going to be a challenge. I think, though, that there are some common areas. We're seeing, I think, a growing concern on both continents about cybersecurity, particularly after some of the recent hacks. And I think that could be a real priority for the Polish presidency. But we also have some questions about data governance that are likely to come up, particularly if we see another case about the digital privacy framework, a Schrems 3, so to speak. And then there are some wild cards. The president-elect is a fan of cryptocurrency. This is something that has not really been addressed very much in the U.S.-EU dialogue, and it will be interesting to see how that dialogue goes on. And in fact, I think the dialogue itself and the mechanisms of the dialogue are another area of change. Frankly, I don't expect the TTC to be present. I expect that there may be some substantive dialogues, such as the US EU China dialogue, which could be used to consider tech issues, and the US EU cybersecurity dialogue, another possibility there. But an overarching area, a mechanism of cooperation, although I think it has been immensely valuable, I don't think we are going to see something like that during this next 4 years.
Well, thank you, Fran. Putting a lot of items on the agenda here already. We'll dive into hopefully a number of them. And thank you also for setting out that sort of mixed picture, as you called it. Some also contradictory or contradictory messages of signaling. I would like to move over to Mark. Would love to get your reaction to what Fran said. So some significant shifts, but then also mixed picture, evolution, not revolution on the European side, as Fran put it. And let me ask you also specifically on artificial intelligence, on AI and transatlantic cooperation in this field. We saw a lot of coordination in sort of setting some initial rules of the road, or at least principles through the TTC. Obviously, the EU's AI Act as the first comprehensive regulation of AI, plus the US executive order. What are you watching in that space, specifically focused on artificial intelligence when it comes to the transatlantic agenda, Mark?
Thank you, Jorn, for these 27 questions. I would like to congratulate you for a very successful week of discussions, and obviously, thank you for bringing us all together. I agree with Fran. We're getting a lot of mixed signals, but there's going to be some significant change in US technology policies in general. Now, I think there are 5 core priority areas of the incoming administration that seem quite clear at the moment. Number 1 is the effort to even strengthen the US supremacy and strategic sovereignty when it comes to all key technology areas. Obviously, that's not something new, but I think it's going to be supercharged under this administration, meaning that there's going to be a big push through deregulation, through additional investments and other incentives to really achieve, strategic supremacy in this area, especially vis-a-vis China. So I think this will be a core priority for this administration, and a challenge as well as an area of opportunity when it comes to the EU and US dialogue. Second core priority, I think, is trade. It's clear that Trump wants to balance the trade deficits with the EU and other regions in the world, which means that we can expect the EU-US tech collaboration being overshadowed by the discussions about trade. We know that the trade deficit is around $130 billion annually. So this is, I think, one of the priority issues that the US administration will try to address. I think the third important issue that Fran already mentioned is the promotion of freedom of speech and political neutrality of social platforms. And this, I think, is very near and dear to the heart of not just the president, but also many other people that are part of the administration or will be close to it, including Elon Musk. And lastly, I think the new administration will rigorously protect the interest of US businesses abroad, including the EU. Now, of course, every country defends its commercial businesses abroad. So this is, again, not something specifically new, but I think it's going to be a lot more rigorous than has been the case during current administration.
Mhm.
So these are, I think, 5 areas where we can see major developments moving forward. Now, when it comes to AI regulations, Jorn, you said it rightly. The EU has enacted the first comprehensive set of rules governing this technology in the form of the AI Act. Now we're in the implementation phase, which for me is equally important, if not even more important than the legislative phase. I think the whole world is watching very closely whether the implementation of the AI Act will be a success
Mhm.
and will judge us when it comes to that. I think this should be also one of the core priorities of the new commission, meaning that the sandboxes are established on time, that there's a clear understanding among all the stakeholders, be it startup community, scale-up community, as well as European industrial champions, what are the rights and obligations under this new regulation. So basically demystifying AI Act, I think, will be crucial if we want our technology scene really to minimize the compliance costs and risks compared to their competitors in other regions. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, especially since we've seen the gap in the AI advancement growing larger and larger. And
Mhm.
obviously, I think the key for this commission will be really to simplify, to implement what's been adopted. I would suggest even a moratorium on new tech regulation. Let's just focus on what we already have and make it work for European and other companies. And I think this will be a task big enough for one term.
Thank you, Mark. Very interesting points. I want to connect and come back to a number of them. With the moratorium idea, you built the perfect segue to bringing in Rita, because I wanted to ask you, Rita. One, obviously, would be great to get your quick reactions to some of the things you heard from Fran and Mark. But I also wanted to ask you, in terms of this new political cycle that we're seeing in the new term of the von der Leyen II Commission, the overriding theme has obviously been Europe's competitiveness. We're all probably aware of Mario Draghi's report on the issue, where he identified the lag in Europe's digital revolution and digital adoption of new technologies as a major reason for Europe's lagging competitiveness, for the low productivity growth across the European economy. And so competitiveness is perhaps the defining word for the next commission mandate. At the same time, Mark already alluded to it, a number of these flagship digital regulatory pieces, DMA, DSA, AI Act, we can go down the list, are all in the implementation phase. And so from the private sector perspective, and from a US company that has a huge footprint in Europe, how do you see the interplay between, on the one hand, this political focus on competitiveness and this competitiveness push, and then on the other hand, still parts of a pretty ambitious regulatory agenda and its implementation?
Thank you so much, Jörn, and thank you for inviting me to this conversation. And congratulations to you on a very successful week. I'm excited to be here. Google is a proud American company, but as you mentioned, we are very present in Europe and including in the Central European region. We are present since 2006, so Google is 26 years old. You can say that we have been part of the region almost from the beginning. And we do have like over 2,000 employees and really significant investments in Poland, in Romania, but also in other countries around the region. I think Fran talked about a quite considerable legislative body that was put in place over the past few years, not just in the immediate previous commission, but in the past few commissions. And Bruegel did a study which kind of looked at over 12 different fields that touches on digital, from privacy to cybersecurity to connectivity. And, they kind of showed it per column, and each column had at least some 14 different EU legislation. We talked about DSA and content, and I think that's an interesting example when you look at the regulatory complexity that companies are looking at when they're rolling out products in Europe. So DSA itself interacts with 7 or 8 different EU level legislation, from audiovisual to media to terrorism to child protection laws. All of these, including the DSA, have national laws implementing them in practice. When you look at who the regulator is, a company like Google would interact with the European Commission. We have our regulator based on our headquarters, as well as all national authorities across the EU, sometimes more than one, who kind of have interest in a given field. AI, Mark talked about the AI Act, but AI is in everything that we do. So I think we need to kind of think about also not just the AI Act, but the broader digital acquis and regulatory framework. And this has consequences. Friend and I were at an event with the Norwegian Investment Bank, and forgive me if I'm getting the numbers wrong, but the CEO talked about where do they invest, and more than 50% of their investment is coming to the United States, and only 20-something% comes to Europe. And Fran actually asked the question of why is that, and the answer was the regulatory complexity is part of the reason. From our perspective, the time that it takes to do due diligence before we're rolling out a product in Europe is long, and it's much longer than in America or the rest of the world due to this complexity. And that means we, at a minimum, delay launching state-of-the-art technology in the continent. And I think that also has an impact on the competitiveness. And when you look at how quickly things evolve in the AI and quantum space, just the past 2 weeks, Google announced a major breakthrough in quantum. We announced new products in the AI field. So this is even the cumulative effect of just simply delaying product availability is important for European competitiveness. So definitely second, this is a very long-winded way to say that I definitely second Fran and Mark in arguing for simplification, and also just taking a look at, what do we have today? How does this body of law works together? What does it mean when companies are rolling out product? And how can we make it more straightforward? I think AI will be very, very interesting. We've done a study on the macroeconomic impact that AI can have in Europe, and including in the Central European region. It has enormous productivity gains, which can translate into 5% GDP growth just in the CE region. And I think that's an equivalent of like 100 billion euro worth of economic output. And the key to this will be how many companies actually using it.
Yeah.
And today, the uptake in the Central European region is very low. It's 4% of the small and medium-sized companies who are using AI regularly. And for the big companies, it's about 20%. This is way below the European average. So I think we can do more there. And maybe just last thought, because you all mentioned the international competition, and that's very, very real. The Chinese companies are formidable competitors for us, and very, very interested and active in artificial intelligence. I've read statistics on the internet that there are about 1.6 million companies in China today that are focused on AI, just 200,000 created this year. And it's not just about how many companies are out there focusing on this, but also the uptake is real. Just in large language models, there are 600 million users of those services out there in China. So when we think about European competitiveness, the regulatory environment and how it influences it, we also should think about, what does it mean in a global competition as well.
Thank you, Rita. And definitely a good point that whenever we talk transatlantic, we have to obviously keep the global picture and dynamics and developments very much in mind. Mark, if I can bring you in, because Rita sort of already hinted at or mentioned some of the facts on the ground in Central Europe. As a former minister for digital transformation in Slovenia, you're well aware of sort of the very mixed picture across that region, right? Some front runners, some laggards, some very unique challenges, but also huge upside and opportunity with high STEM, highly educated STEM workforce in many countries and many other strengths in the region as well. Can you connect what you learned and what you found maybe most surprising and saw as the biggest opportunities and challenges in that ministerial post, and connect that with both the European competitiveness debate, but also obviously Central Europe as an actor in that debate?
Yeah, Jorn, this is a great question. And Central Europe and Central European countries in general have been major advocates for digital transformation and for, I would say, innovation and prioritizing innovation over regulation in the EU context. So, to be honest, I'm very happy that a number of commissioners coming from this region will be at the very heart of the new commission. I'm talking about Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, who will be in charge of the economy and will be tasked also with rules simplification, which is a very important and not a very easy task at the same time. We'll have Commissioner Kubilius responsible for defense, coming from Lithuania. Defense, again, is a high-tech area and something that, Europe has a lot of catching up to do in relations to the US, but also our adversaries to the East. I would say that this region has always been, ready to reform, has never been afraid of changes, simply because we've gone through so many changes since the fall of the Berlin Wall that, a reform just isn't a bad word in our region. And I see this as a big advantage compared to perhaps some other parts of Europe. I think there are two areas of strength that I would emphasize. One is governmental technologies, or GovTech, where we see Ukraine leading the world when it comes to, their digital government app, which is second to none, or their cybersecurity infrastructure, which is, again, one of the best in the world. They've also proved themselves to be incredibly innovative in the area of defense technologies, and so have other Central European countries like Poland, as well as the Baltic countries. So I think in those areas, we can lead the way, not just in Europe, but also globally. And I see this as an enormous opportunity. Now, when it comes to the challenges, and thank you, Rita, for mentioning, most of our economy is made of small and medium-sized companies. And, it's really them where we need to focus on in the following years, helping them with digital transformation, helping them to grow, helping them to acquire new markets, develop, AI-powered tools and products, and so on. And I was very happy to see when I was reading the mission letter from Commission President von der Leyen to Commissioner Virkkunen that digital transformation of SMEs should be one of the core priorities of the new commission. And I think this is an area where we've been lagging behind, especially when it comes to the US. And this is an area where Google and other super advanced tech companies can contribute a lot to with their tools and know-how from other regions. So I think we have inherent advantages in terms of the mentality. I think we're well placed within the new European Commission to deliver change also at the European level. I think we have some areas of technology expertise that are second to none, but we do have to address the fundamentals of our economies, meaning empowering medium and smaller companies.
Thank you, Mark. And it's also, I think, really good to hear there are areas of opportunity. I think that gets a little bit lost in the debate about Europe and the tech space when we talk about this. Fran, I will come to you in a moment, but I do want to bring Rita in again and maybe respond to what Mark just set out as some of the opportunity areas and get your perspective of how Google looks at that. You already mentioned in your first comment that Google has been in the region for a long time. You've made major investments there. So how are you thinking about the value proposition of that region? Again, against the background of a relatively diverse picture there as well.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we are very excited about the region, and we keep growing in the region. We have big investment, multi-million-dollar investment announcement just the past few years in Central Europe, and frankly, the growth of the region have been really very, very significant. The past 20, 25 years, I think some countries are at 170% growth when it comes to economy. So and as Mark mentioned, policy is personnel, personnel is policy, and clearly there are many important positions in the European Commission that is internationally facing, from Mark quoted all of them, trade, as well as the high representatives and others who are coming from the region. And I think that will be also, very helpful in the international context. I think when it comes to SMEs, we are proud of how much our tools can be helpful for smaller and medium-sized companies. I think coming back to the regulatory kind of environment, it's helpful to think about, how can we encourage uptake? How can we encourage investment in innovation? How can we improve the skills? Because ultimately, uptake is also dependent on skills. We, from our end, have invested heavily in digital skilling in Europe, but also in the Central European region. I think we're over 1 million people who have been trained on digital skills on our platform. So I think those are areas where we are delighted to work together with governments from the region as well as the European Commission.
Thank you, Rita. Fran, coming back to you and maybe a little bit more of the challenging side of things. Mark spoke of a likely push by the Trump administration to advance US technology supremacy, especially vis-a-vis China. Mark also mentioned that potential spillover effects from trade rifts and the tariff threat from the incoming administration, what that could mean for US-EU technology conversations and cooperation. You've done a lot of work also looking at and tracking this digital sovereignty push on the European side. How do you see that theme and that thinking evolving when you might have a much more contentious US-EU relationship on technology issues? How high is the risk that Europe's reaction won't be a positive competitiveness agenda, but rather one of, okay, we're going to wall ourselves in, we're going to promote national champions, and we will try to compete with both US and Chinese actors in this field through these kind of digital or tech sovereignty strategies?
So first, let me say that I very much agree with Mark that a lot of the tech discussion, the transatlantic tech discussion, will be overshadowed by the transatlantic trade discussion, at least for the first couple of years, while the new administration in Washington figures out exactly what it wants to do with its trade policy. And I think that it's also going to be a situation where, compared to the Biden administration, the Trump administration is not going to make Europe the priority that it has been in Washington. So part of the TTC's reason for being was that the Biden administration wanted to reaffirm the relationship. Didn't have anything really to do with the substance, but actually with the signaling that setting up such a dialogue gave. And I just don't see the Trump people coming in as having Europe on the radar screen as a friend and partner, but actually being quite ambivalent. And so I think that it will be a lot more, as I think it was, well, both Mark and Rita have mentioned China. I think it will be a lot more about how does Europe fit in the discussion about tech transfer or preventing tech transfer to China. And that will be, in a sense, the way the administration judges the worth of Europe as an ally and partner, one heavy component of it at least. And that is going to be a situation that is challenging for Europe, because Europe has a much more broad relationship with China. There is a lot of Chinese investment in Europe. Not all of it in strategic sectors, so it's not all, things of concern. But also there are many industries in the EU, and particularly in Germany, where China is seen as a major market, and is a major market, at least for the moment. But we'll have to see how that plays out. And we have the question as well of Elon Musk's investment in China, and we don't know what impact that will have on the US position overall. But let me go a little bit to the European side. I think one of the things that I'm watching, and then I'll come to the digital sovereignty issue, two bits of policy, and they're not actually tech areas. One is Capital Markets Union, or whatever it's going to be rebranded as. Because I think a lot of what we've seen in Europe in terms of the inability of innovative startups to flourish in Europe and become major companies has been the lack of capital available to them. A lot of European startups grow to a certain point, and then they go to Silicon Valley to find funding. So they don't stay as European companies. And I think this is something that Europe needs to address urgently. And they have been playing with Capital Markets Union for, Mark will remind me, but it's like 15 years now. And they need to move forward with that. The other thing is the omnibus legislation that we are anticipating in the new commission. And every time I talk to someone from the business community, I'm reminded how much rests on that, because it is about simplifying. And although it has been made clear that it will not change the content or the substance of regulations, there is quite a lot that can be done simply by changing reporting and the definition of reporting and what has to be reported. And so I think that is a key piece of legislation, even though calling something an omnibus legislation sounds incredibly boring. But I think it's going to be something that is key across not only the tech sector, but other sectors of the European economy, but certainly the tech sector. On digital sovereignty, I think that has always had multiple meanings. So in some cases, European politicians mean it to say, we have the right to write regulation that applies in our region of the world. And they do. And American companies who participate in Europe, and I know Google does, expect to adhere to those regulations. But it also can be that being sovereign in the digital space means that you rely only on European companies, on EU companies. And I think, first off, that's a bit of cutting your nose off to spite your face, because I think that there are, wonderful companies strong companies that are innovative and bring things that are essential for the European economy. And this is the crux of where Europe finds itself now. It has not been able to develop these top innovative companies, and is therefore reliant to some degree on US companies that bring that innovation, the new way of working, etc. What I'm seeing, though, is a recognition through the competitiveness debate that this is the case, that there should not be closed borders in the tech community. We've had some difficult struggles, including over cybersecurity standards certification for cloud services, and we will continue to have that. I do think that the new commission, there are fewer actors who are arguing for a restrictive view of digital sovereignty. But we do see tech sovereignty having emerged as a key watchword. And I think this reflects not only digital policies, such as those that would be core to the DMA, the DSA, data policy, et cetera, but also the technologies upon which the new economy rests. And that can be anything from batteries to electrolyzers, to turbines, to critical minerals, all those things that are important, as well as AI and quantum computing. And so I think that that is something where we're seeing more awareness in Europe of their dependencies, not only on US companies, but also China and others. And I think that that is where we're going to see a lot of rhetoric and activity. Now, what does this mean for the transatlantic partnership? And I'll stop on that, is that it depends. It depends what the Trump administration does. And it also depends on how that's perceived. If the Trump administration were to levy tariffs or put restrictions on things that Europe feels it is too dependent on, then we will see a reaction. But otherwise, I think what Europe would prefer is that the US and the EU find a way to work together to ensure that they both have secure critical minerals, new technology, that they are leaders in the new technologies of the future economy, including AI and quantum. But it's not quite clear yet from either side of the Atlantic how that can be accomplished.
Thank you, Fran. I'll come to Rita and Mark on a similar theme before we have to wrap up. So maybe quick responses here. Rita, going back to the point that Fran made in a previous round, this risk of getting pushed in one direction on the US side, getting pushed in the opposite direction, perhaps, on the European side. I want to turn that into positive and ask, in order to avoid such a scenario, what would you like to see as the cooperation agenda, as the priorities on a transatlantic tech agenda in terms of cooperation? And Mark, I'll come to you after Rita on the same question.
Thank you very much, Jörn. Fran also mentioned AI as an area where there has been a lot of coordination over the past few years. And we are big supporters of international, governance, or at least an interoperability among the different legislative frameworks. And there was an initiative in the G7 to develop a code of conduct on AI, which then got transferred into the OECD with the objective of kind of like broaden a little bit the scope and the interest internationally. I think we see a little bit of a wavering, if you will, on commitment to collaboration. We are part of a code of conduct process in Europe, which is, to Mark's point about implementing the AI Act. I do not see a huge amount of overlap with that code in the G7 code as it was drafted. And I think that's a little bit of a challenge, because I think that was a good initiative in terms of like gathering interest from the industry, having companies, being part of the process, as well as figuring out a way of how we add accountability, etc., and make it as a pillar of like future international collaboration. So I'm hopeful that, the interest in kind of remaining coordinated, aiming for an interoperability, at least among the rules that companies are facing around the world, will remain. I mean, Google is in the fortunate position that we have significant compliance teams that are able to calibrate and find a way to comply with local requirements and somewhat localized products if that's necessary. It does take a lot of resource, and I think, for smaller companies, to Mark's point about supporting SMEs and their expansion, I think this is more challenging. So business will always advocate for legal certainty, for interoperability, for international coordination. I think that will be helpful, in particular for companies who are smaller.
Thank you, Rita. Mark, over to you with a similar question. You brought us some optimism and sense of opportunity on Central Europe and Europe earlier. Can you do the same for transatlantic tech cooperation?
So, I mean, first of all, I think Europe is, first of all, completely disillusioned when it comes to Russia, and increasingly disillusioned when it comes to cooperation with China. And that includes Germany. German companies are losing out in the Chinese market. It's not just the car maker, but many others. So this exposure that Fran rightly mentioned, I think, will decrease over time, which means that there will be a stronger political push for greater transatlantic cooperation in countering threats coming from China and other countries that are hostile to us. So I think when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to critical minerals, also when it comes to semiconductors, there is ample opportunity for collaboration, but we shouldn't take this partnership for granted. I think President Trump will be very transactional. Europe will have to make a strong case why partnership is worth his time and America's effort, and we'll have to show what we can contribute to, all the areas that I mentioned. And Europe, frankly, has a lot to contribute. It's not just the largest market in the world. It's also, the birthplace of companies like ASML, which is absolutely indispensable in the semiconductor production. And I could go on and on and on and on. So we'll have to be very strategic how we make our case to the new administration to basically make it worthwhile for them to continue strong transatlantic alliance. I would say that one potential area of friction is definitely DSA and DMA implementation. We've seen a number of probes being opened by the European Commission against largest US tech companies. I don't think there will be any, I would say, change of heart when it comes to the implementation of those two pieces of regulation. But I would hope that the European Commission applies these two pieces of legislation as rigorously as it has against American companies, also against companies like TikTok, especially in the light of the recent presidential election in Romania. If we are not able to use this legislation to make sure a similar scenario cannot repeat during German federal elections and many other elections coming up in 2025, then I think we need a fundamental rethink about the digital regulation that we've been so busy working on over the past couple of years. I would also perhaps add something on the AI governance debate. I wouldn't say that the new administration will be all about their regulation. I mean, we've seen Elon Musk talking about catastrophic risks posed by AI, and I think the US might be more focused on addressing this kind of dangers of AI and other cutting edge technologies. And this is an area where we can easily find common ground. We've seen an AI safety summit being organized In London, for the first time, we've seen other summits following. So this is definitely an area where I think we can cooperate very well. But my hope for Europe is to really focus on one word and one word only, and that's innovation. Following every word of the drug report and making sure that we can, if not diminish, then narrow the gap that we have in AI investments or AI and technology in general. I think this is the big mission for the new commission. And this is something that I think should keep all of us, especially here in Europe, up at night.
Well, thank you very much, Mark and Fran and Rita, of course, for this first dive into exploring a very differentiated assessment of what the transatlantic tech and digital policy agenda is likely to shape up. And we at the Europe Center, through our Transatlantic Digital Marketplace Initiative, will continue to follow all of these issues and hopefully bring all three of you back together in a few months' time to see where we are and how things are shaping up. Also really appreciate the assessments of what role Central Europe can play in shaping that transatlantic digital agenda and driving certain themes and policy action at the European and transatlantic level. As I said at the beginning, this is obviously part of our Central Europe Week, our flagship convening on Central Europe and its role in the transatlantic partnership. And so I'm now delighted to bring in Jenna Ben-Yehuda, the Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council, to help us wrap up a week of exciting convenings across the Atlantic, both here in Washington, D.C. and across Central Europe. Jenna, over to you to wrap us up for Central Europe Week.
Well, thanks so much, Jorn, for the introduction and for your moderation and all of the work that's gone into this. I was pleased to join this really interesting conversation with, I think it's fair to say, a number of sobering assessments about the challenges that lie ahead, but clearly lots of opportunity. Delighted to help wrap what has been a really rich and very full week. The theme for this year, Forging a Transatlantic Response to Challenges Within and Beyond, hosted, of course, by Jorn's team, our terrific Atlantic Council Europe Center. It's been a big week. The team has hosted no fewer than 12 events in 5 cities across 5 days in Warsaw, Vilnius, Prague, Bucharest, and DC. That's a feat that I think not even Taylor Swift accomplished in the same span of time. So we're beating the average here. But throughout the week, we've had over 13 Central European officials, Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski, Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky, and Slovak Prime Minister Peter Kimmets, among other notable leaders from across the region. We're really delighted to have had them join us. This is the 6th year for the Council's annual Central Europe Week, which really celebrates the dynamic U.S. Central European relationship and explores ways for how the U.S. and Central Europe can really come together to lead the transatlantic agenda. So this year's Central Europe Week covered a wide range of issues that reflect really the true depth of the relationship between the U.S. and this important region, including the strategic importance of Ukraine, the need for greater alignment on Russia and China, and the role of trade and tech cooperation. And of course, against all of these discussions, the backdrop of a central theme in this year of elections and leadership transition, the question facing all of us here in the US and CE alike is how we can really develop a productive, forward-looking agenda in 25 and beyond. Though I think we doubtless expect some turbulence ahead. It's these relationships which will certainly ground cooperation and dialogue. It's something we've been thinking about all year, and as names for new positions continue to unfold for what we can expect in the Trump administration, we continue to be, I think, a centerpiece of dialogue, and that will need to continue in the months and years ahead. But what is clear amidst so much transition is that this transatlantic relationship must continue to be dynamic, that it has to adapt and evolve amongst these leadership transitions, but that it is rooted in the strength that we've long enjoyed. So I think we also all see a tremendous amount of opportunity here for the relationship. We have amongst us here staunch allies and transatlanticists who are strong supporters of Ukraine, believers in the importance of standing up with our allies together. And that's a big part of why we do this and why we'll continue to do it. This year's conference would not have been possible without our numerous partners, speakers, guests, and colleagues here at the Council. So first, to our partners who made the programming possible, including our strategic partner, Google, our premier partner, Jagiello 2000, NATO Public Diplomacy Division, as well as our transportation partner, LOT Polish Airlines. Thanks also to the American Center in Prague, the U.S. Embassy in Prague, the Geopolitics and Security Studies Center, European, GlobeSec, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung group, the Baltic American Freedom Foundation, as well as our embassy partners here in D.C., Poland, Lithuania, and Slovakia. Thanks also to our really terrific speakers who've participated amidst very busy schedules and inboxes. We really are so grateful for your engagement. And thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in. We hope you'll continue to follow us, engage with us, and watch this space because there is so much more to talk about. So with that, thanks to all of you and especially to Jorn. And I guess we'll see you before next year, but happy holidays to everyone and looking forward to lots of robust continued engagement. Thank you.